All right, so now we are talking comma rules. And I know commas can be an intimidating thing. We use them all the time, so sometimes it's hard to remember when it's right to use it and when it's wrong to use it. So let's review the basic comma rules, and then we'll take a look at how they work in writing. So the first comma rule is use commas with items in a series. So when you've got a list of things or maybe even a list of adjectives, you're going to separate those things with commas. The second rule, non-essential interrupting information. So when you've got information in your sentences that isn't necessary to the understanding, in other words, you could drop it out of the sentence and the sentence would still mean the same thing, you want to make sure you set that off with commas. The third rule, when you lead into a sentence with an introductory clause or a phrase, set that off with a comma. Then the fourth rule, when you link two independent clauses together using one of those coordinating conjunctions, a fanboy, for and nor, but or, yet or so, if you're going to include that fanboy, you've got to throw a comma in front of it. So that's a mode of linking those together. The fifth rule is when you've got coordinate adjectives. That just means when you've got more than one adjective describing the same noun, you want to make sure you separate them with a comma. 6, you're going to use those commas also to set quotations off from the rest of your writing. 7, you're going to link a dependent clause to an independent clause with a comma. One thing to note about this rule, though, is it only needs to be used when you lead with the dependent clause. So it's going to be dependent clause, comma, independent clause. You wouldn't flip it the other way around. So you wouldn't do independent clause, comma, dependent clause. Just keep that in mind with Rule 7. And then finally, this rule I'm sure you're very familiar with is just the common conventions, like numbers, or dates, or to separate cities from states and that kind of thing, those expectations that we have. So let me talk to you about one trick that I have. And I admit it's not the super easiest one because it's not going to help you remember all of those rules right away. But the one thing I can say is that you got to use these rules to make sure you should be using a comma or to make sure you shouldn't be using a comma. So the bottom line is check your rules. If you're not sure whether a comma should be there or not, see if it matches up to one of these 8 things. If it does, you're good to go. If it doesn't, you've got a comma splice. So let's take a look a little bit at some commas in action. All right, so we've got this sentence, oh my gosh, comma, I can't believe you just said that. So we've got 2 commas at work here. The first one separates oh my gosh here. And oh my gosh kind of plays 2 different roles. It's definitely an introductory clause, but it's also one of those non-essential pieces. So we know twofold that we've got to make sure we have a comma there. That's rules number 2 and rule number 3. All right. And then you have, I can't believe you just said that, comma, quotation mark, she screamed. So this is your dialogue tag that attaches this quotation to the rest of the sentence. And we said with rule number 6, you want to make sure that you use that comma to separate the quotation from that dialogue tag or the rest of the sentence. All right, the next example, because my school is not air-conditioned, true story, it's not air-conditioned, I'm not really looking forward to going back, but I get to buy cute sleeveless dresses. So this first comma here is following comma rule number 7. All right, we have this subordinating conjunction because here, and we know when that leads off a clause, it makes it a dependent clause. So rule number 7 says we have to link a dependent clause to an independent clause, which is I get to buy cute sleeveless dresses. All right, second comma here, we've got 2 adjectives, cute and sleeveless, both describing dresses. So those are our coordinate adjectives, and that's an example of comma rule number 5 being used. So you can see some of these in action. Let's take a look and see if you can help me add the commas to this paragraph. So as I read, kind of think about where you might place them. It says Chicago Public Schools is collaborating with G-Team, a segment of the Chicago-based web company aimed at connecting people to their communities on the project. Kits will provide students with folders, notebooks, pens, and pencils. All right, so we've got a lot going on here in one big sentence. What we want to do is make sure we get the commas in the right place to make sure that we're emphasizing the right things. So we've got Chicago Public Schools is collaborating with G-Team. And what you notice here is this part of the sentence, a segment of the Chicago-based web company aimed at connecting people to their community, is just a way of retelling us what G-Team is. So it's non-essential information. If we dropped this underlined part out, the sentence would still make sense here. So when we said we had non-essential information, we wanted to make sure we separated it with commas. I'm going to put the comma here inside the quotation mark because that's what grammatical rules say to do. And then I'm going to throw another comma here down at the end to set off that non-essential information. Then the next sentence picks up, kits will provide students with folders, notebooks, pens, and pencils. So we've got a list of items there. We've got to throw our commas in to separate the items. We've got folders, comma, notebooks, comma, and here's where we need to stop for just a second. This last one is an optional comma. When you've got items in a series connected with that conjunction and, you have the option of throwing a comma in before the and or not. Either is technically grammatically correct. I choose not to, but if you threw that in there, you weren't altogether incorrect either. So see, commas aren't that scary when we just slow down and think about these 8 rules that we have here.